welcome back to the channel. Today I thought I would branch out from my typical Halo lore vids and start in the basics of one of my favorite universes out there, the SCP universe. While I work on the greatest battle and other lore videos, I think the occasional SCP vid would be a nice little change of pace. Also, as of putting this up, I'm gonna be in Sweden for a few weeks, and I thought I would leave you with some fresh content until I return in April. So, today we're going to cover the basics. What is the SCP Foundation, and what is an SCP? This is just meant for basic summaries, and for more in-depth looks, I will have videos linked below. If you know nothing about the SCP universe though, this video is for you. Before we get into it though, the YouTube algorithm is an unforgiving god who knows less mercy than an angry, unkillable lizard. You can help me gain favor with it by liking and subscribing. Now, let's get into it. In order to understand the Foundation, we must understand why it exists. To know why it exists, we gotta know what an SCP is. SCP stands for Special Containment Procedure, and in essence, each containment procedure is unique. The reason for this is that the anomalous, or things that just cannot be reasonably explained by our modern understandings, exist. This can vary from aliens to alternate universes or dimensions, to origami dragons that come out of a cardboard box to chat with us. The SCP Foundation's job is to take these anomalies and contain them or protect us from them, developing these special containment procedures in the process. The Foundation's goal is to protect humanity without damaging normalcy, so in other words, keeping the world the way it is. Knowledge of the anomalous would change the world forever, and as such the Foundation and its various SCPs are kept under wraps. But getting back to SCPs. An anomaly has been secured, so how does the Foundation contain it? A special containment procedure undergoes a standard template. First, there is the unique item number. The item number is what will identify the SCP easily. As an example, SCP-173. What follows is the object class. While there are more than this, there are three primary types of SCP: Safe, Euclid, and Keter. The classifications can be misleading, however, and often newcomers make the mistake of assuming that the classifications are based on how dangerous they are. This is not the case. An SCP is classified based on how difficult it is to contain and not by safety. Safe SCPs are anomalies that can be easily and reliably contained and left alone. Safe, however, does not mean the SCP is not dangerous. Say you had a rock that kills you if you look at it. All the Foundation has to do is put a blanket over the rock and lock it in a secure and clearly labeled room. The object is considered secured, contained reliably, and thus it is safe. Just put a few security guards out there and yeah, that's it. However, say someone were to post a picture of that rock on the internet after retrieving it from the vault, or they dropped it in front of a camera during a presidential speech. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions could die, therefore the rock is still very dangerous. Of course, not all SCPs are dangerous. The Foundation has a number of very beneficial SCPs under the safe category, such as SCP-500, a bottle with 47 red pills that can cure literally anything. Next up there is Euclid. Euclid SCPs require more extensive and simultaneously specific procedures in order to contain it. The SCP can be reliably contained so long as the procedures are followed to the letter. As an example, an anomalous human would be Euclid because they have free will and thus they are unpredictable. SCP-173 is not a human, but it is a statue that will kill you if you do not look at it. Even blinking will allow it to move up to you and break your neck or strangle you. It can be contained, but it has to be contained in a specific way or else it will break containment. Finally, there is Keter, or Keter, depending on how you pronounce it. I prefer Keter. Keter SCPs are incredibly difficult to contain reliably, and in some cases they just cannot be contained reliably or at all. They require a massive amount of resources to contain, and as you can guess, these resources are just not always enough. The most famous example arguably would be SCP-682, the Unkillable Lizard. It is an extremely hostile entity capable of speech and complex thought. It is capable of extremely fast regeneration, and the amount of strength it possesses is enough to destroy anything the Foundation throws at it. 682 was also known for its ability to transform and adapt to its environment, or in the Foundation's case, attempts at termination. 682 has escaped containment multiple times, and it is well known for how hard it is to get back in containment, thus it is on the Keter list. However, these three are not the only ones. Another classification is Thaumiel, an SCP that can be used to contain another SCP. However, we should move on because, well, there's just a lot of different classifications. So, now to move on to the Foundation itself. How does it work? Who knows about it? Who leads it? Who is responsible for it? The SCP Foundation, as you know, is clandestine and more or less one of the biggest secret organizations on the planet. Most countries, such as the United States, Russia, the United Kingdom, Japan, China, etc., 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 know of the Foundation and trust them to do their job. As I mentioned earlier, the Foundation's goal is to preserve normalcy. Keeping humanity as it is now is its goal, and thus it does not do much beyond its standard operations. However, that does not mean the Foundation doesn't regularly meddle in the world's affairs for the sake of their own mission goal. At the very top of the Foundation is the O5 Council, also known as the Overseers or Overseer Council. They are the top of the food chain, so to speak, and they are in charge of literally everything. Now, who the O5s are, how many of them there are, and whether or not there is an administrator varies from SCP canon to canon. But I will explain that later. Beneath the O5s are a variety of administrators, site directors, doctors, staff, officers, among other things. In order to prevent this video from going on too long, we'll only focus on 3. The first are the D-Class personnel. The D-Class are more or less human lab rats. Oftentimes, the D-Class are inmates on death row, or they have been convicted of a horrendous crime, you know, like murder. The Foundation will pluck these prisoners from their local governments and use them for the more dangerous and/or menial tasks. As an example, cleaning SCP-173's containment chamber. One D-Class cleans, the other 2 watch the SCP. If they die, oh well, the Foundation can replace them. Fucked up, but it works, and it's better it's them than, you know, some innocent kid. Next up are the various doctors of the Foundation. They are typically tasked with the research and/or containment of an SCP. Usually there are a number of assisting staff to help them because, well, you can't contain an SCP on your own. Finally, the Mobile Task Forces, or MTFs. An organization like the Foundation needs to be able to operate independently of world governments and politics, with the Foundation regularly encountering dangerous and hostile anomalies and even hostile anomalous groups. There is a need for highly trained units that can go into hell and get the job done. Quite literally in some cases. MTFs are comprised of elite teams of personnel of various backgrounds, ethnicities, and experiences. Each mobile task force differs from the next, as all of them are tailored to the specific function of their unit. While this may seem confusing and needlessly complex, one needs to consider the circumstances the Foundation finds itself in. There are thousands of different types of anomalies and anomalous groups of interests, and as such they need as many MTFs versed in as many things as possible. There are just too many anomalies for one single mobile task force to be trained in all of them unless the task force itself is either anomalous or under a special circumstance. As an example, MTF Beta 7, the Maz Hatters. This mobile task force specializes in the rapid acquisition and subsequent containment of incredibly hazardous biological, chemical, or radiological anomalies. The number of anomalies that these guys have to handle is already vast, and there are limits to their capacity. Imagine that there is a skyscraper where once you step inside, you find yourself stuck in an ever-shifting building with more floors than it should have. The interior can be disorienting and confusing, not to mention highly dangerous. For situations like this, you will need a team of specialists that are used to this sort of environment. Hence MTF Zeta 9. The mole rats, as I mentioned before, some MTFs are unique or anomalous themselves. Take MTF ETA 4 as an example. ETA 4 is described as a, quote, unit of intelligent SCP-3095 affected seabirds. ETA 4 specializes in information collection and analysis, complementary field research and support, and in extreme cases, airborne combat. So, literal birds that are sapient that will help in airborne combat and intelligence gathering. Pretty wacky. One final thing to know is that the Foundation often finds itself in competition, conflict, or cooperation with a number of groups of interest. GeoWise can vary, ranging from corporations such as Anderson Robotics to weird and odd groups like Are We Cool Yet? Some GeoWise are government attempts at having their own version of the Foundation. A good couple of examples could be the American Unusual Incidents Unit, often seen as a joke by the Anomalous World, or the Soviet GRU Division P. However, the two most famous GeoWise are the Chaos Insurgency and the Global Occult Coalition. The Global Occult Coalition, or GOC, is a UN-run organization whose goal is the destruction and removal of the anomalous as a means of protecting the human sphere. It is not uncommon for the Foundation and GOC to conflict with one another, a good example being the Operation Ghost Town animation, which demonstrated this very, very well. However, they will also work together because each organization understands each other's necessity even if both feel the other is misguided, and it is arguably a good thing that they are both in the world, whether or not you agree with one's methods. I will say, I am really oversimplifying the GOC. It is a much more complicated thing, so feel free to look more into it after this video. The Chaos Insurgency is exactly what it sounds like, an insurgent group with the goal of bringing the Foundation to its knees, but the goals of its leadership is unknown. It used to be one of the Foundation's best mobile task forces, but, well, to say the least, it isn't anymore. Both the Chaos Insurgency and Global Occult Coalition are very popular within the community, and the CI is even seen in the very famous and fun games SCP-ContainmentBreach and SCP Secret Laboratory. Our last section will discuss a very confusing aspect of the SCP universe for newcomers: canon. What is and is not canon in the SCP universe is fickle and fluid, because everything both is and isn't canon. What does this mean? I'm confused, Dan. Well, it is simple. The standard stuff is canon. The SCP Foundation is canon. It canonically has an O5 Council. That's canon. It uses D-Class. That's canon. Every SCP is canon. However, the specifics, such as events, persons of interest, they can be fluid. I mentioned that we do not know the identity of the O5s, and that is because there have been multiple iterations of the O5 Council. In some cases, the Foundation has an administrator who founded the whole organization and assembled the Overseer Council, such as in the SCP-001 proposal, the Black Moon. Speaking of 001, it is for the exact reason that everything is and isn't canon that there is no canon 001. There is a 001, but nobody knows what it really is. As such, there are 001 proposals. None of these proposals are more valid than the other, and it is up to each individual as to what they think is the real 001. As an example, I subscribe to the idea that every 001 proposal is actually SCP-001, and that the SCP universe is stuck in a cycle of death and rebirth with a new 001 every time. Why? Because Tahoni's Does the Black Moon Howl is my favorite 001 proposal, and it ends with the SCP Foundation's administrator bashing the Black Moon to death, which is 001 in that universe, and it ends with the universe resetting. That's it. That is my own personal headcanon, and that is why canon is fluid in the SCP universe. It allows readers in the community to craft their own stories and headcanons. Someone could believe that the SCP-001 proposal, the Red Sun, I completely forgot its name. Oh my goodness, how could I have done that? Was actually reversed, and the new 001 is the Factory. Like, there is literally no limits to the headcanon. From ARMA operations to live-action films such as Overlord to animated stories such as SCP Sedition or written short stories, sometimes SCPs and SCP-related stories are inherently linked to each other. A common favorite in the community is the Cactus Verse. Now, with all that said, go explore. I have nothing more to say on this matter. The wiki is linked below, and yeah, just have fun exploring. The SCP community is so creative and beautiful. You will love it. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. If you want to interact with me more, my Patreon and Discord are both excellent ways of doing just that. I will see you in the cosmos, friends.